This is the Senior Life Academy, located on the campus of the University Park United Methodist Church here in Dallas, Texas. Welcome. I'm Dee Dee Cassad, and I have with me our panel, Diane Wilson, Fred Kite, Marian Mathis, and Bob Monroe. And we're going to discuss eternity today. We may all understand it in terms of time and space, but how do we understand it as a Christian? What does the Bible say about eternity, and how should we view it for ourselves? Diana, tell me, what is eternity to you?
Eternity for me is a concept that's very big, and it's a lot bigger than just Christianity's definition. For me, it's the sense that something goes on forever.
So it's beyond time and space.
It is. And I have a sense, I don't know it for sure, but I have a sense that what we call our soul is eternal. Mm-hmm. That it has always been and it always will be.
Right.
And it's a part of God. It's part of God operating in us.
Absolutely. Is that how you see it, Marian?
Similarly, I do see it that way. I think of eternity as encompassing the dimensions that we're familiar with living in. So it's present in those dimensions. It can be with us, but it's beyond us at the same time. And I think it's hard to describe because we don't have any uncorporeal experience. We're here and we're in this place and in this time,
but we feel there's something more and beyond.
Absolutely.
And as a Christian looks at it, Fred, what do you think?
Well, it's life in relationship with God.
Yes.
That's what it means to me.
And life in relationship. So it's not a place.
That's right.
So how do we look at eternity as a place? Do Christians look at eternity as a place? Like, do we believe in the three-tier universe? Heaven, earth, and hell. Jesus mentioned the kingdom of heaven many times. He also mentioned hell many times. He says, if you call a person a fool, he will go to hell. Now, if we take that literally, what does that mean? What does that mean to you, Bob?
Well, we talked a little bit before the panel, and I thought Fred had a good idea, which was it's a separation from God. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean a place. Mm-hmm. And that separation from the creator of the universe, I can't imagine how that would be, but it would, in a human terms, it has to be very uncomfortable, that's for sure.
Well, how do you reconcile when Jesus says, "In my Father's house are many mansions"?
And I go to prepare a place for you.
And that's a place.
He uses that language, and I often wonder, well, is it because we can't really understand anything other than that kind of language? And what does he really mean? Because he says, then I'll bring you to me. I'll come back and bring you to me. So that all sounds very location driven.
Exactly.
But we know that it won't be. I mean, I guess we know that it won't be.
I agree.
So you do not think there's actually a place that is called heaven?
I think it's here and now.
You think it's here and now?
Yeah, I think it's what Bob said. It's got to do with your connection with God. If you're in the flow and the Spirit is with you, and you feel like you're doing what God's called you to do, I think that's a piece of heaven. And I think if you get disconnected and it's all about you and your ego and your bank account, for instance, then that can look like hell.
Well, I have been with people who have, right before they died, have seen a relative of theirs and spoken to them. Where was that relative?
well, gee, if we knew that, wouldn't that be great? Oh, wow.
But I really have had that
Yes.
experience
Yeah.
several times.
In our human terms, so far, science talks about dimensions that we cannot measure, but we can show mathematically. And there's such a thing called the quantum theory. Now, we all look like we're solid, but we're really full of holes. There's particles
Yeah,
going through us
right.
all the time.
Space and
And
energy.
I've heard there's a man, David Wilkinson, who is a PhD in astrophysics, but he's a Methodist minister in England. And he wrote a book commenting on Hawkins' concept of time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his thoughts he put out, of course he doesn't know, I thought was interesting, that when Jesus appeared after his crucifixion, and in some cases went through a wall, that he was in a dimension that we can't experience yet. And therefore, Wilkinson carried it to the point where our dead are among us. We just can't, it's another dimension that we can't see, but sometimes we think we sense.
Mm.
And time is a man's invention. So eternity, another thought he put forth was eternity was, there was no time. And that led me to think, well, gee, does that mean that I would somehow get to know ancestors that went back 20 centuries or something? You know, it leads you to a lot of other thought.
Oh, it does lead you.
But it doesn't mean there aren't places, but those places or spaces in time may be something we just don't know yet. It's a mystery.
Absolutely, it's a mystery. But when you look at the Bible, the first words were in the beginning. So there was eternity before we had the world as we know it. In other words, the globe and the people, the earth and the sky and the birds and the animals of this world. Before that, there was eternity. So there is a sense in which we might consider, even though we may not believe in the three-tier universe of heaven, earth, and hell, which a lot of people do, and I'm not, since we don't know, we can't say yes or no to any of this. But it is interesting for us to think about. And the Bible specifically, though, has references, especially from Jesus' own words, that there is a heaven, the kingdom of heaven. Now, we can also say the kingdom of heaven is now.
Is with you.
Is
within you.
Mm-hmm.
And within you.
Mhm.
Is that how you see it, Fred?
Yes, definitely. I don't feel like there's a hell.
You don't feel like there's a hell.
No,
I agree.
I feel
You don't
like
even feel like there's a hell on earth?
Well,
well, total separation from God.
Total separate. All right. Bob mentioned earlier about how do we look at people like Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and even Stephen Hawkins, who could not give himself the privilege of believing in God. What happens to those people? Is there an eternity for them?
That's not up to us. I mean, as you so well put it so well, it's above our pay grade.
yeah, we don't know.
We don't know.
That's
Yeah.
right.
But it is interesting to
But
think.
we do know that we are all God's children.
We do know that.
And we do know
Everyone.
Everyone.
Yes, everyone. And we do know that everybody doesn't have the same environment to grow up in, that everybody doesn't have the same neurological equipment or the same physical equipment
Or geographic.
or geographic or
Relationship.
yes, there's just so many variables. And for us to say, for me, the tragedy always is for people to worry about whether they're going to heaven or not. Like it's up to us, because God is so much bigger than that. I think God is so much bigger.
One of the hardest things I ever had to do was I was called to talk to somebody whose son had just committed suicide. She happened to be Catholic. And that is a mortal sin. How do you comfort somebody that believes that her son will not go to heaven?
Well, I think one thing is that even in Catholic theology, there are those who espouse the idea that when we die, when we see God or appear before God, we are given a choice at that point.
At that point.
At that point, we're given a choice.
But who knows?
But who knows? But
That's right.
I'm saying to comfort someone, the thing I would have to say is that we don't know what God has in store for this boy, and we don't know what relationship they have. And at the moment that he met his maker, we don't know what happened. But I choose to believe that God would be welcoming of him, just like the
I
prodigal
agree,
son.
definitely. We don't know the relationships which caused this event.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I love that, what you just said, Miriam, about the prodigal son, because that's what that story is all about. I mean, that kid
That's
didn't deserve
exactly.
a party.
Well, and that's the Christian perspective.
Yes.
We do not believe that God is so unmerciful that he will not someday bring everybody
Embrace us.
Amen.
into the throne of God. As a Christian, that's how I believe. Hitler might be the first person I see when I get there. Who knows?
Yeah.
And then by comparison, I would say, well, did he deserve this? But as you say, we are not the judge.
Yeah,
of
we don't
this.
know.
Yeah.
I have read a book called the Urantia book. I haven't read the whole thing. I've read parts of it. There's lots of other spiritual texts in the world, whether it's Bhagavad
Gita.
yes, or others like that. But the premise in that book is that after people die, if Hitler's the one I was thinking of, there's kind of like a school for wayward souls that people get to kind of go through so that they can catch up with the people who were closer to God while they were here. But it's all kind, it's all caring, it's all moving people on, or as Wesley would say, to perfection.
For people who commit suicide, they usually they've given up hope. They're sad. They're desperate. There's so many things.
They've got so much meaning.
And if somebody in their religion chose to believe that taking your own life was a mortal sin, we're all sinners, and God can forgive all sin. And so I would try and say to that person that the Almighty God, the loving God, can forgive that child and take him into his bosom, because he or she was in terrible pain, and it wasn't done something maliciously or hurt somebody else.
How do you then How do we then talk about when Jesus said to the other one on the cross, next to him on the cross, "You will meet me in paradise today"? What is paradise? Is it as you said, maybe a stepping stone to heaven? Is it a real place? Is it part
Maybe
of the
there's
process?
not much difference between heaven and paradise. Maybe it's both in close relationship with God.
But that's the only time Jesus used that word, as I understand it. That, today you will meet me in paradise. He didn't say heaven. So, which goes to your point, that there is a process. And
We could be.
Or a journey?
Because we don't know. I mean, there are people write books about experiences they've had after they died and been dead for a while, and then evidently they come back. And I'm not saying those are true or not true. There are not very many of those.
No.
My own father had an experience where he went down that tunnel with a light. They brought him back. He had a heart attack and he came back and survived that. But that changed him because that was, and a lot of people who've had near-death experiences have that tunnel of light and this feeling of bliss. So there's clearly something going on. Some people have said it's the way your nervous system starts to shut down that causes the bliss, which is nice. It's sort of a shock for way of the nervous system dealing with it. But honestly, there's so much about God that we don't know. And
Oh, absolutely.
that is,
And the process.
yes, and the mystery. But I think the one thing I feel I know is that God is love, and God is so much bigger than we can figure out or have the vocabulary for.
I have a friend who when her husband died, visibly saw his spirit leave the body.
Wow. Did she say what it looked like?
Well, it was just it was like a wisp of, she recognized it, and it just came up out of the body within 3 or 4 seconds after he died.
So it had some kind of physical form
Some kind of
or
physical-
color.
that's right.
Or,
Absolutely. Saw the, which says to me an awful lot about soul. You know, we've talked about soul before. To me, you don't have a soul like you have a heart. You know, they always talk about the soul like it's the heart or the kidneys or the liver. Where is it in the body? It isn't. We are soul.
yes,
It's
we are
who
spiritual beings
We
in
are
a physical world.
a spiritual being in a physical world. Well, there is mystery to this,
For
and
sure.
it is interesting to contemplate and to think about. Thank you all for giving us your thoughts. I think it is helpful, and we hope it is helpful for you. We'd like to hear from you. Our email is on the screen just below where you're looking right now. And if you would email us, we'd really appreciate it. In the meanwhile, may God surround you with His grace.